Hi there, welcome to Lamlam's audiobook novel channel. Today's story is titled, The Devil's Bride. Chapter 1, The Debt. The night felt heavier than most, thick with the kind of silence that warned of a storm long before the clouds appeared. Isabella Rossi sat hunched over her textbooks in the cramped living room, the glow of her desk lamp cutting through the darkness. College deadlines weighed on her, but the weight of her mother's absence, and her father's mistakes, pressed harder. The front door creaked open. She glanced up, expecting her younger brother, Marco. Instead, her father stumbled in, pale and unsteady, as though the world itself had drained him of life. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and for the first time, Isabella noticed something beyond exhaustion in his face. Fear. "Papa," she whispered, rising to her feet. "What's wrong?" He shut the door quickly, pressing his back against it like a hunted man. His hands trembled as he dragged them over his face. "Bella, I tried to fix it." Her chest tightened. "Fix what?" The words came out in fragments, as if each one carried a noose. "The debt. Tables. The wrong men. I thought I could win it back. I thought I could protect you." Isabella's throat went dry. She had always known her father gambled, but she believed it was small. Poker nights, whispered loans. Never anything that could ruin them. "Papa, how much?" she asked, though her voice was already breaking. His silence was her answer. The air shifted, and then came the knock, slow, deliberate, echoing like the toll of a bell. Isabella's heart froze. Her father's face drained of what little color it had left. "They've come," he whispered, his voice cracking. Before she could move, the door opened, not from her father's hand but from a shadow larger than life. A man stepped inside with the ease of someone who owned every space he entered. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a perfectly cut black suit, Damian Moretti filled the room like a storm. His presence was suffocating, commanding, merciless. Isabella's breath caught. She had heard the name whispered in fear around the city, always followed by warnings. Damian Moretti, head of the Moretti crime family. The devil in an Italian suit. Her father dropped to his knees, desperation etched into every line of his face. "Damian, please. I just need more time. I'll find a way." Damian's gaze swept over him once, cold and dismissive, before landing on Isabella. His eyes were sharp, impossibly dark, lingering on her with unsettling focus. He tilted his head, studying her not with curiosity but possession. "You've run out of time, Rossi," he said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "Debts must be paid. And I always collect." Her father clutched at Damian's sleeve, begging. "Not my family. Take me but not them." A smirk touched Damian's lips, cruel and knowing. You're already ruined. But her." His gaze flicked back to Isabella, and her stomach knotted. "She still has value." The room spun, Isabella's ears ringing as her father cried out in protest. In that single moment, her life fractured. She was no longer just a college student, no longer just Isabella Rossi. She was a debt, a bargaining chip, a bride-to-be for the devil himself. And Damian Moretti had just claimed her. Chapter 2. The Devil's Proposal. The silence after Damian's words was deafening. Isabella could still hear the echo of them, bouncing off the walls of her chest. She still has value. Her father's broken sobs filled the room, but she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Damian Moretti stood like a shadow carved from stone. His presence alone commanding the air, the walls, even her pulse. "Please," her father choked, clutching Damian's sleeve. "She's just a girl. She's innocent." Damian pulled back slowly, his expression unchanging. "Innocence doesn't erase debt." His eyes flicked to Isabella again, holding her in place as surely as chains. He stepped closer, his shoes clicking against the wooden floor, his cologne, dark cedar and smoke, invading her senses. Isabella wanted to run, but her legs refused. "What do you want from me?" she forced out, her voice trembling but steady enough to catch his attention. A cruel smile curved Damian's mouth. Finally a voice. I was beginning to wonder if you'd let your father speak for you forever. Her father tried to shield her, but Damian's presence loomed larger, swallowing the space between them. His next words were delivered with calm precision, as though he had rehearsed them long before this night. You will marry me, Isabella Rossi. The room tilted. Her chest constricted. What? It's simple. Damian clasped his hands behind his back. His tone smooth but laced with iron. Your father owes me millions. He doesn't have it. He never will. But you can repay the debt in a way far more valuable. Her father cried out. No. Take me instead. Damian's gaze snapped to him, and the sharpness in his eyes silenced the protest instantly. Then he turned back to Isabella, studying her face, her trembling hands, the rapid rise and fall of her chest. Marry me, he said softly, almost tenderly, though the weight of it was anything but. Or watch me dismantle what little remains of your family. Your brother will suffer. Your name will be ash. Every Rossi debt will be collected in blood. Her stomach churned. Why me? You have power, money, women. Why force me? Damian's jaw flexed, but his eyes remained locked on hers. Because you're Rossi's blood. And because I want you. The last words hit like a brand. Not love. Not need. But possession. Her father sank against the couch, sobbing quietly, broken. Isabella felt the weight of Damian's stare press her into the floor, a silent reminder that there was no escape, no rescue, no dream of a different life waiting just outside the door. Damian stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper meant for her alone. You have until tomorrow to decide. Your family's life or your freedom. Choose wisely, cara mia. And with that, he turned and left, leaving behind the echo of his threat, and the chains Isabella could already feel closing around her wrists. Chapter 3. The Wedding Contract. The church smelled of roses and candle wax, yet nothing about the moment felt sacred. The pews were filled not with family or friends, but with men in tailored suits and women with eyes too sharp, too watchful. Their smiles were brittle, their whispers venomous. Isabella Rossi stood at the altar in white silk, her hands trembling beneath the veil. She had not chosen the gown, the vows, or the man waiting for her. Everything about this day was a cage, gilded and cruel. Her father sat slumped in the front row, pale and hollow, as though life had already abandoned him. Marco, her younger brother, was nowhere to be seen. Hidden away, protected or imprisoned, Isabella didn't know. And then there was Damian. The devil himself stood across from her, dressed in black instead of white. His presence as commanding as ever. He didn't fidget. He didn't shift. His dark eyes were steady on her, unreadable, as if he were memorizing the shape of her resistance. Do you, Isabella Rossi, take Damian Moretti as your lawfully wedded husband? The priest asked, his voice low, almost fearful. Her throat closed. Every instinct screamed no. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear off the veil and bolt down the aisle. But when her gaze slid to Damian's men, silent shadows lining the walls, guns concealed beneath their jackets, her courage faltered. One wrong word and blood would spill. Her father lifted his head weakly, eyes glistening with shame and sorrow. In that moment, Isabella understood. This was not only her fate but his punishment too. Her voice broke as she whispered, I do. The priest's words blurred, lost in the thunder of her heartbeat. She felt the band of cold metal slip onto her finger, binding her not to a man but to a sentence. When it was Damian's turn, he didn't hesitate. His I do rang out firm, certain, almost triumphant. The sound made her flinch. You may kiss the bride. Damian lifted her veil with slow precision, his knuckles brushing her cheek. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Then, without warning, he claimed her mouth. Not tenderly, not gently, but with the ruthless certainty of ownership. Gasps fluttered through the crowd, but Damian didn't care. He pulled away, his dark eyes locking on hers. In that single look, he promised both ruin and protection, torment and desire. "Mine," he whispered against her lips, low enough for only her to hear. Applause echoed hollowly in the church, but Isabella felt none of it. She wasn't a bride. She was a captive, dressed in silk and bound to the devil. And as the bells tolled overhead, she realized this was only the beginning of her damnation. Chapter 4. A House of Darkness. The black car glided through wrought iron gates taller than any wall Isabella had ever seen. Beyond them sprawled the Moretti estate, an empire disguised as a home. The mansion rose against the night sky, its marble walls glowing ghostly beneath the lamps, its windows dark like watchful eyes. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress. Isabella's fingers tightened around the seatbelt as the car rolled across the gravel drive. She had seen mansions before, on glossy magazine covers and movie screens, but this was different. This place didn't speak of luxury. It whispered of power. And power, she realized, had a weight heavier than stone. The car door opened. Damian stepped out first, his shadow spilling across the driveway. He didn't look back to offer her a hand. He didn't need to. She followed because not following wasn't an option. Inside, the air was colder. Chandeliers glittered above, portraits of severe-faced ancestors lined the walls, and everywhere she looked, people watched her. Men in dark suits, women with guarded eyes. Servants bowed quickly when Damian passed, but their gazes lingered on Isabella, measuring her, questioning how long she would last. A woman approached, tall and elegant, her hair pinned in a severe twist. "This way, Signora Moretti," she said smoothly, though her eyes betrayed nothing. Isabella flinched at the name. Signora Moretti. It didn't feel like hers. Felt like shackles. They led her through endless halls, grand staircases, locked doors, long corridors where whispers seemed to live in the very walls. Every corner felt like a secret, every shadow a warning. Damian finally spoke when they reached a vast room at the end of a corridor. "This is your wing." Your wing. The words hit strangely. Was he granting her freedom, or keeping her contained? Isabella stepped inside. The room was beautiful, with velvet drapes, a canopy bed, gilded mirrors. It looked more like a queen's chamber than a prison, but she felt the bars all the same. "You'll stay here," Damian continued, his tone even, commanding. "You'll have everything you need. But understand this, Isabella. Every hallway, every door, every guard, they answer to me. There is no leaving without my word." She turned toward him, anger sparking despite her fear. "So I'm a prisoner." Damian's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "A bride. The difference depends on you." He closed the distance between them slowly, his presence suffocating. Leaning down, his voice brushed her ear like smoke. "Learn this house, Isabella. Every corner has eyes. Every wall carries whispers. You will either master it, or it will swallow you whole." And then, without another word, he left, the heavy doors clicking shut behind him. Isabella stood frozen in the silence, her reflection staring back at her from the gilded mirror. She didn't look like herself anymore. She looked like a ghost already haunting the House of Darkness. Chapter 5. The Devil's Rules. The morning light crept through velvet drapes, but Isabella woke to the sound of a lock turning. Her door opened and Damian entered, not with haste, not with permission asked, but with the quiet certainty of someone who owned the air she breathed. He looked immaculate as always. Black suit, cufflinks gleaming, tie sharp against the crisp white of his shirt. No trace of the man who had claimed her lips at the altar with ruthless hunger. No trace of softness, either. "Get up," he said, his voice calm, commanding. Isabella sat up slowly, clutching the sheet around her as if it were armor. "You don't knock?" she asked, bitterness slipping through before she could stop herself. Damian's eyes flicked to her, sharp, unreadable. Then he moved toward the window, pulling the curtains wide until the sunlight spilled across the room. "Rule number 1, he said smoothly. "Your time is no longer yours. When I enter, you stand. When I call, you come. You don't question it." Her pulse quickened. "So I'm not allowed privacy?" "You have walls, locks, servants, guards," he replied, glancing back at her. "You have more protection here than you ever did in your father's crumbling house. But privacy?" His mouth curved faintly, cruel and amused. "That's a luxury you cannot afford." He crossed to the vanity and picked up a brush, weighing it in his hand before setting it down again, as though testing how her world could be disturbed by his smallest movement. "Rule number 2, he continued. "Your safety is my concern. You will not step outside these walls without my permission. You will not speak to men in this house unless I introduce them. And you will not touch a phone, a car, or a door without my say." Isabella's jaw clenched. "So I'm a caged bird?" Damian tilted his head, studying her defiance. "A caged bird lives longer than one foolish enough to fly into the jaws of a wolf." His words were calm, but they carried weight that pressed down on her chest until breathing felt like surrender. He walked closer, slow, deliberate. She could feel the power radiating from him, as though he were testing how close he could come before she broke. "Rule number 3, Damian said softly, his voice lowering to something dangerous. "You will never lie to me. You may hate me. You may curse my name. But if you lie, Isabella—" He leaned close enough for her to feel his breath against her cheek. "I will know. And I will not forgive it." Her hands trembled, but she refused to look away. His eyes were fire and steel, daring her to defy him, daring her to test the walls of the prison he had built around her life. Finally, Damian straightened, his expression unreadable again. "Obey these rules, and your family remains safe. Break them." His gaze swept the room, reminding her of invisible eyes in every shadow. "And you'll learn just how merciless I can be." With that, he turned and left, the echo of his footsteps vanishing down the hall. Isabella sat frozen, her heart hammering. The rules weren't just commands. They were chains, invisible but unbreakable. And already, she could feel them tightening around her will. Chapter 6. The First Spark. The mansion felt like a maze of polished stone and whispered shadows. Days blurred together, silk sheets she never asked for, silent meals under Damian's watchful eye, the suffocating reminder that her freedom had been traded for her family's safety. Hatred kept her alive. It fueled every breath, every defiant glance she dared to throw his way. Yet, like cracks in glass, moments began to slip through. Moments that unsettled her more than his threats ever could. It happened first in the dining hall. A long table stretched between them, a battlefield of porcelain and silver. Isabella pushed her plate away untouched. Damian's gaze flicked to the food, then to her. "You'll eat," he said flatly. "I'm not hungry. Starving yourself doesn't make me weaker. Only you." She braced for anger, for him to snap his fingers and have the servants force her. But instead, he rose silently, walked to her side, and slid the plate back in front of her. His hand lingered, not rough, not cruel, just there. His voice, low and steady, carried no edge. "You need strength here, Isabella. This house eats the weak." Her breath caught, confusion threading through her defiance. Later in the garden, a place she wandered only because the guards allowed it, she saw another piece of him. One of the men had raised his voice at a servant, hand lifted in threat. Before Isabella could react, Damian appeared. His tone was ice. "Touch her, and you'll lose the hand." The man paled, bowing quickly, retreating with shame. The servant fled, grateful tears in her eyes. Isabella froze, heart twisting with something she refused to name. Why would a devil care for the people beneath him? When their eyes met, she expected gloating, a reminder of his power. Instead, Damian only said, "No one under my roof suffers harm without my consent." His gaze held hers, sharp but steady. "That includes you." The words unsettled her more than the threat. Because for the first time, Isabella saw something beyond the monster in the suit. Not kindness, not love, but a flicker of something rawer, more dangerous. Protectiveness. And that frightened her most of all. Because hatred was simple. Hatred kept her safe. But if she began to see anything else in him, anything human, she feared she might lose more than her freedom. She might lose herself. Chapter 7. Shadows of the Past. The Moretti mansion had too many rooms, too many corridors that led nowhere, or perhaps led everywhere she wasn't meant to see. For days, Isabella kept her head down, pretending to obey, but at night, when the halls emptied and the chandeliers dimmed, curiosity pried open the doors fear kept shut. One evening, she wandered farther than usual, her steps muffled against marble floors. She paused at a locked study, its door left slightly ajar. Inside, firelight flickered across shelves stacked with leather-bound ledgers, files marked with names she didn't recognize, except one. Rossi. Her blood chilled. The folder lay half open on Damian's desk, as though it had been touched recently. She slipped closer, trembling fingers brushing the page. Beneath the typed dates and signatures, a handwritten note was scrawled in ink so dark it looked like dried blood. Asterisk Maria Rossi. Settled. 1999. Asterisk. Isabella's heart thudded violently. Her mother's name. Settled. What did that mean? Her mother had died in a car crash when Isabella was only a child, or so she had always believed. Her hands shook as she read further, fragments that made no sense yet cut her deeper with every word. Asterisk agreement terminated. Consequences executed. Asterisk. A sound behind her snapped the air. The folder was yanked from her hands. She spun around, heart leaping to her throat. Damian stood in the doorway, shadows cloaking his frame. His eyes burning with something darker than anger. What are you doing here? His voice was calm, but the steel beneath it made her knees weak. She swallowed hard, words tangling. I saw my mother's name. For a long, breathless moment, Damian said nothing. He only watched her, his jaw tight, his grip on the folder white-knuckled. You know nothing of this, he said finally, each word deliberate. Leave it buried. No, her voice cracked, but the fire inside her pushed forward. Tell me what you did to her. His eyes flickered, not with guilt, but with something she couldn't name. Regret. Fury. Pain. He closed the folder, setting it on the desk with slow precision, like a man controlling a storm inside him. Some truths will destroy you, Isabella, Damian said quietly, stepping closer, his shadow swallowing hers. And I won't let you unravel, not yet. Her breath hitched as he brushed past her, leaving the study dark once more, but the question clawed at her ribs, refusing to be silenced. Had her mother's death truly been an accident? Or was Damian Moretti's empire built on her blood? Chapter 8. Enemy Eyes. The storm broke on a night when the air was too still, the silence too heavy. Isabella had begun to sense that quiet in the Moretti mansion was never peace. It was the pause before violence. She was returning from the garden when the first sign appeared. A single red rose laid on her pillow, its stem wrapped in black silk. Not one of Damian's gestures. He dealt in commands, not flowers. Fear prickled her skin. Someone had been inside her room. The next morning chaos erupted. A car bomb detonated just outside the gates, shattering glass and rattling the iron fences. Isabella flinched at the explosion, her heart leaping into her throat. Servants screamed, guards rushed. Damian arrived within seconds, pulling her roughly against his chest, shielding her from the sound and smoke. His grip was brutal, his jaw clenched, but his body was a wall between her and the world on fire. When the smoke cleared, a package lay untouched on the gravel. Inside, a note, handwritten in crimson ink. The bride of the devil won't live long enough to wear his crown. Isabella's blood ran cold. She had never felt like a wife, but now she was something else. bait, leverage, a weapon in someone else's hands. Damian's face was stone as he read the note. But Isabella caught it, the flicker in his eyes, the tightening of his hand around hers. Anger. Possessiveness. A promise of retribution. That night, she overheard fragments of the truth. Through the half-open doors of his office, voices clashed. "It's Romano," one of his men hissed. "He's testing you." "He won't touch her," Damian's voice cut like a blade. "Not while she breathes under my roof." Isabella froze, her pulse hammering. Romano. A rival boss. She wasn't just a bride. She was a pawn on a bloody chessboard. And every move made around her was one step closer to war. Later, when Damian returned to her chambers, she dared to ask, "Why do they want me?" His gaze pinned her, fierce and unyielding. "Because you're mine." The words should have sounded like chains. Instead, they tangled with the memory of his arm around her during the blast, the shadow of his fury when her life was threatened. But as she lay awake long after he left, one truth refused to loosen its grip. His enemies didn't see her as a wife, or even as a woman. To them, Isabella Rossi was a message, a target, a fragile flame they could snuff out to weaken the devil himself. And sooner or later someone would try. Chapter 9. The Masquerade Ball. The mask felt heavy on her face, gilded gold and edged with jewels that caught the light. It wasn't a costume, it was a cage. Isabella adjusted the ribbon. Her stomach knotted as she stared at her reflection in the gilded mirror. A stranger looked back, a bride cloaked in silk and shadows, a pawn polished for display. Damian appeared at the doorway, already dressed in his black mask. His suit cut to perfection. His presence filled the room before he spoke. "You will walk at my side," he said simply, fastening his cufflinks. "Smile if you must. But do not stray." She wanted to spit defiance, to refuse, but his eyes pinned her with an unspoken warning. Tonight was not about her. Tonight was about power. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and whispered politics. Masks concealed faces, but nothing could hide the danger humming beneath the surface. Every laugh was sharp, every toast carried poison. The city's elite mingled with men Isabella knew were killers, their wives adorned like trophies, their eyes hollow with resignation. Damian led her through the crowd with a possessive hand at the small of her back. People parted for him, respect, fear, and hatred bowing in equal measure. Isabella felt their eyes on her, the devil's bride, a curiosity and a warning wrapped in silk. At the center of the hall, Damian stopped. His voice was low, for her alone. "Watch carefully, Isabella. Tonight you'll see the truth of this world." And she did. She saw how he commanded silence with a glance, how rivals tried to mask their envy, how allies offered loyalty with smiles that never reached their eyes. But she also saw something else. How often Damian's gaze returned to her, lingering too long, too intently. When one man brushed her hand in greeting, Damian's jaw tightened. When another let his eyes linger on her neckline, Damian's arm slid around her waist, pulling her closer. His words to them were polite, but his stare promised violence. The final demonstration came when a drunken associate muttered a joke too crude about the devil's pretty little bride. The room froze. Damian moved before Isabella could blink. His fist connected with the man's jaw, sending him crashing to the marble floor. The crowd gasped. No one spoke. No one dared. Damian stood over the bleeding man, his mask shadowing eyes that burned like fire. "Touch her. Speak of her. Even breathe her name without respect," Damian said, his voice carrying across the hall like a blade. "And you'll choke on the consequences." Silence. Then the orchestra resumed, the party swallowing the moment as if nothing had happened. But Isabella couldn't shake the tremor that ran through her. Not just fear. Not just anger. Something else. Something far more dangerous. Because in that ballroom she had witnessed two truths. Damian Moretti was ruthless in power, and utterly, obsessively consumed by her. Chapter 10. Breaking Point. The mansion's walls had begun to close. Each corridor another rib of a cage pressing against her lungs. Isabella had spent sleepless nights replaying her mother's name in Damian's files, Romano's threat, the glint in his eyes at the masquerade. She couldn't breathe in this world. And if she stayed, she feared she would drown in him. So she planned. She memorized the guards' rotations, the creak of the servants' door near the kitchen, the blind spot in the security cameras by the back gate. Every detail she gathered became a stitch in her fragile hope. The night she ran, the moon was hidden, the sky heavy with clouds. Dressed in black, she slipped from her chambers, heart hammering so loudly she was certain it would wake the walls themselves. She moved through shadow, breath shallow, each step both freedom and death. The gate loomed. Just beyond it, the trees whispered of escape. Of life. She almost made it. A hand shot from the darkness, iron around her wrist. She gasped as Damian's shadow detached itself from the night. His eyes burning even in the dark. He had been waiting, watching. "Did you really think," he murmured, pulling her flush against him, "you could run from the devil?" Her pulse thundered. She thrashed against his grip, striking his chest with all the force she had, but he only tightened his hold. Rage flickered in his eyes, not just anger at her disobedience, but something deeper, darker. He dragged her back inside, his silence more terrifying than any shouted curse. In her chamber, he shoved the door shut, the echo slamming through her chest. "Rule number 2, he said, voice low, steady, lethal. "You do not leave without my word. You broke it. Because you're a monster," she spat, chest heaving. "You've stolen my life, my freedom. I'd rather die out there than rot in here with you." For a heartbeat, silence hung. Then Damian moved. He pinned her against the wall, one hand braced above her head, the other cupping her jaw, firm but not cruel. His face was inches from hers, his breath hot against her skin. "You think death would save you?" His voice was a growl, threaded with something that made her stomach twist. "You don't understand, Isabella. Out there they would carve you into pieces just to hurt me. Here you are protected, even from yourself." Her eyes burned, fury and fear colliding with a shiver she couldn't suppress. "You call this protection?" Damian's gaze dropped to her trembling lips. For a dangerous moment, she thought he would kiss her, not out of tenderness but to brand her. Instead, he released her abruptly, stepping back as though letting go took more willpower than holding her ever did. "Your punishment," he said coldly, "is that you no longer walk this house alone. A guard will follow you, day and night. You wanted freedom. Now you'll know the taste of chains." Her chest ached with humiliation, with rage. Yet beneath it all, buried so deep she wanted to claw it out, was the memory of his words. "Out there, they would carve you apart just to hurt me. Cruelty and care. Shackles and shelter." And Isabella hated herself for feeling the smallest flicker of safety in the arms of the man she despised. Chapter 11. The Devil's Protection. The night air was cool, sharp against Isabella's skin as she stepped onto the terrace. She needed space, air, anything to escape the suffocating walls of the mansion. A guard trailed her at a respectful distance, Damian's newest decree since her failed escape. But still, for the first time in days, she felt almost free. The stars glimmered above, pale diamonds scattered over velvet sky. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply. Then the silence split. A shadow lunged from the garden below, a blade flashing under the moonlight. The guard shouted, too slow. Isabella stumbled back, her scream caught in her throat. But before the steel could reach her, another force collided with the attacker. A gun fired. A grunt. The shadow crumpled at her feet, blood spreading dark across the marble. And standing over the body, Damian. His chest rose with steady, lethal rhythm, his gun still smoking in his hand. His eyes locked on hers, and for the first time they weren't cold or cruel. They were wild with something far more dangerous. Fear. He holstered the weapon in one fluid motion and pulled her against him. His grip fierce, almost desperate. "You're safe," he growled against her hair, though his own hands trembled faintly at her waist. "I've got you. Nothing will touch you while I breathe." Isabella's body refused to move. Her heart thundered, her knees weak, but not from terror alone. She had seen him kill before, ruthlessly, mercilessly, but this was different. This wasn't power. This was protection. And she didn't know what terrified her more, the blood pooling at her feet, or the warmth of safety in Damian Moretti's arms. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why do you care?" Damian drew back just enough to meet her gaze. His jaw tight, his eyes dark and unflinching. "Because you're mine," he said simply. "And no one takes what's mine." Her breath caught, the words sinking into her like poison and balm at once. He was the devil, her captor, the man who had destroyed her freedom. Yet in that moment, beneath the weight of his arms and his vow, Isabella realized the most dangerous truth of all. The devil didn't just want her obedience. He wanted her survival, and perhaps her heart. Chapter 12. A Dangerous Kiss. The mansion felt heavier after the attack, every shadow carrying the threat of another knife, another unseen enemy. Guards prowled the halls more than ever, their footsteps echoing like reminders that she was both protected and imprisoned. Isabella couldn't stop replaying it, Damian's arm locking around her, the way his voice cracked with something raw when he swore nothing would touch her. He had killed for her. Not as a performance of power, not to send a message, but to shield her. And that made her more unsettled than the blood that had stained her dress. That night she avoided him. She locked herself in her room, pacing the floor until dawn. Yet by morning the air still hummed with his presence, as though the walls themselves carried his scent, his weight, his claim. By the third day she found him in the library. He stood at the shelves, his jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark veins running along his forearms. Papers were scattered across the desk, maps, photos, lists, plans for war. But when he turned and saw her, all of that seemed to fall away. "You shouldn't be here," Damian said, though his voice lacked its usual steel. "Then stop me," she whispered, surprising even herself. His gaze sharpened, the room shrinking until there was only him, only her, and the fire flickering in the hearth. She had come here to demand answers. About the attack, about her mother, about why he cared if she lived. But the words tangled in her throat when he stepped closer. "Do you know what you're doing, Isabella?" His tone was rough, dangerous, like gravel dragged across velvet. "Yes," she lied. His hand rose, brushing a strand of hair from her face, fingers lingering against her cheek. The touch burned, searing through her resolve, unraveling every wall she had tried to build. She should have pushed him away. She should have reminded herself that he was her captor, her enemy. Instead, her breath caught, her lips parting as though her body betrayed her. "Say no," Damian whispered, his mouth hovering just above hers. His control trembled in the air between them, fragile, fraying. "Say no and I'll stop." But the word didn't come. Instead, Isabella surged forward, her lips crashing into his with a hunger she didn't recognize in herself. It was reckless, it was wrong, it was poison, and she drank deeply. Damian responded like a man unleashed, his hand tangling in her hair, the other gripping her waist, pulling her against him. The kiss was war and surrender all at once, fire and ice colliding until her knees buckled. He tasted of smoke, of danger, of everything she should hate, and yet her heart raced as if it had been waiting for this all along. When he finally tore himself away, his forehead pressed to hers, his breath ragged, his voice was low and broken. "You drive me mad." Isabella's chest rose and fell against his, her lips swollen, her body trembling with equal parts fear and want. She had crossed a line she could never retreat from. "Then maybe," she whispered, her voice unsteady but defiant, "I'm not the only prisoner here." Damian's eyes burned at her words, his jaw clenched, his entire body taut as if restraining the urge to claim her all over again. He stepped back slowly, as though distance was the only way to keep from consuming her. Without another word, he left her standing in the firelight, her lips still tingling, her heart torn between terror and the forbidden truth, that she had kissed the devil, and she had wanted it. Chapter 13, The Blood Oath. The night after the kiss lingered like smoke that refused to fade. Isabella avoided Damian, but her lips still burned with the memory of his mouth on hers. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt his grip on her waist, his breath against her skin. It unsettled her more than any threat in this house of shadows. But danger didn't wait for her confusion to settle. It came for her at dawn. The blast shattered the stillness of the morning, an explosion outside the gates. Windows rattled, alarms blared, and the mansion's guards swarmed like hornets stirred from their nest. Isabella stumbled out of her room in panic, only to be pulled back by a rough hand. Damian. His grip was iron around her wrist, his voice a command cutting through the chaos. "Stay with me." He dragged her through the hall, past the sound of men shouting orders, past the acrid stench of smoke wafting in. Through the haze, Isabella saw it. Two of Damian's men lying motionless near the entrance, crimson staining the marble floor. Her stomach lurched. "They weren't after me," she whispered, but Damian's silence told her otherwise. By the time they reached his office, the truth was undeniable. On his desk lay a black envelope, sealed with red wax, the symbol of the Romano family, one of his oldest rivals. Inside, written in sharp, taunting script, "She will bleed for your sins." Isabella's knees weakened. She didn't need to ask who she was. Damian's jaw was stone, his eyes like fire about to consume everything in reach. He tore the note in half, then in half again, until nothing remained but shreds on the floor. "They think they can use you against me," he growled. "They think you're a weakness." Isabella's voice shook. "And aren't I?" For a moment, his gaze locked on hers. There was no softness, no hesitation, only the raw, brutal truth of a man who had built an empire on blood. "No, Isabella. Mine. And what's mine is untouchable." That night, the household gathered in the grand hall. His men, his lieutenants, his inner circle. Isabella was forced to stand at Damian's side. Her presence a living declaration. She felt the weight of every stare, the resentment of men who believed she didn't belong here, and the suspicion of those who wondered why their Don would risk everything for her. Damian raised a glass of dark wine, his voice carrying like thunder. "They want to test me. They want to touch what's mine. Tonight, I swear before you all, any hand that reaches for her will be severed. Any name whispered against her will be silenced. By my blood, I bind her to this family." A murmur rippled through the hall. Blood oath. The most sacred and most dangerous pledge in the Mafia world. Before Isabella could react, Damian turned to her. He pulled a dagger from his belt, the blade gleaming under the chandelier light. Without breaking eye contact, he drew it across his palm, crimson welling instantly. Then he offered it to her. "Take it," he ordered. Her heart pounded. The room felt suffocating. She shook her head. "Damian, If you don't," his voice dropped to a growl only she could hear, "they'll never see you as more than a pawn. Do you understand? They'll tear you apart." With trembling fingers, Isabella wrapped her hand around the dagger. The metal was cold, the weight heavy, like a choice she could never undo. Slowly, she pressed the blade against her skin, wincing as it bit into her flesh. A thin line of red blossomed across her palm. Damian clasped her bleeding hand in his, their blood mingling, dripping onto the marble floor. His voice roared, "By her blood she is bound. By my blood she is untouchable." The hall erupted in a chorus of loyalty, men striking their chests, swearing allegiance. Isabella, however, felt her world tilt. The cut on her palm stung, but not nearly as much as the realization. She had just crossed a line. She wasn't simply Damian's reluctant bride anymore. She was now tied to his empire, his enemies, his sins. The devil had bound her to him not with vows, not with chains, but with blood. Chapter 14. Unwelcome Truths. The cut on Isabella's palm was still tender, wrapped in silk and hidden beneath her sleeve. Every time she moved her hand, the sting reminded her. She had been branded not by iron but by choice. A choice she had been forced to make under 100 ruthless stares. But the worst wound wasn't on her skin. It was the gnawing question, why me? Damian hadn't just bound her for protection. There was something deeper, something he wasn't telling her. The answer found her when she wasn't looking. She had slipped into the study one evening, intent on stealing a moment of solitude. The shelves were lined with leather-bound volumes, but her eyes fell on the desk. Papers stacked neatly, folders sealed with red wax. Curiosity pulled her closer. She knew she shouldn't touch anything of his. Damian guarded his secrets like a dragon hoarding gold. Yet her fingers trembled as she reached for one particular file, already half open. Inside were old photographs, grainy black-and-white images of men in suits, glasses raised in toasts. Her father's face leapt out at her, younger, sharper, smiling in a way she hadn't seen in years before his death. Isabella's breath caught. Beside him stood Damian's father. And behind them, others she recognized from whispered names. Men who had ruled the underworld before Damian's reign. She flipped through, her pulse quickening. There were contracts, transactions, records of meetings. Her father's name was scrawled over and over, not as a victim of gambling debts, but as a partner. A man who had sat at their table. Then came the final blow. A newspaper clipping tucked inside, yellowed with age. Mafia bloodbath at Moretti warehouse. Dozens dead in an ambush. At the center of the article, a single line circled in red. Primary suspect. Antonio Rossi. Her father. The room swayed. Isabella gripped the desk for balance, her heart hammering like it might shatter her chest. All her life, she had believed her father's downfall had been weakness. Gambling, debts, desperation. But this was betrayal. He hadn't just owed Damian's family. He had conspired against them. You shouldn't be in here. Damian's voice was low, but it froze her blood. She spun to see him standing in the doorway. His presence filling the room like a storm. His eyes dropped to the folder in her hands, then rose to meet hers, unreadable. Tell me it's not true, Isabella whispered, her voice breaking. He strode forward, plucking the file from her grip. Truth is a weapon, Isabella. In the wrong hands it kills. That's not an answer. Her voice rose, raw with grief and anger. Did my father betray your family? Did he cause that massacre? Damian's jaw tightened. For a long moment, silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally he spoke, each word deliberate. Your father was no innocent man. He chose his side and men died for it. Men I loved. Men I buried. The floor seemed to vanish beneath her. She staggered back, shaking her head. You let me believe he was just broken. That he gambled, that he made mistakes, but this? You let me carry his shame without knowing the truth. Damian's hand shot out, gripping her arm. His eyes burned, fierce and dangerous. I didn't tell you because I knew it would break you. And because if you ever breathed his sins aloud in this house, they would carve you open for them. Do you understand? His betrayal didn't just stain him, it stains you. Tears blurred her vision. So what am I to you, Damian? A wife by contract? A shield for your enemies? Or just the daughter of a traitor you can't let go of? For the first time his expression faltered. A flicker of something she couldn't name. Pain, hunger, maybe both. He cupped her face roughly, forcing her to meet his gaze. You are mine. No past, no bloodline, no ghost of your father will change that. But his voice cracked on the last word, and that was how Isabella knew. The truth had cut him too. That night, alone in her room, she pressed her wounded palm against her chest, staring into the dark. She had kissed the devil, bled for him, bound herself to him. And now she knew the unthinkable. Her father's hands had been red long before Damian's. She wasn't just caught in the devil's game. She was born into it. Chapter 15 Heart of Fire. The mansion was quieter than usual, but not peaceful. Quiet in Damian's house was never peace. It was the silence before another storm, the kind that made Isabella's skin prickle. She had spent the day avoiding him. The revelation about her father weighed heavy on her chest. Every glance at Damian a reminder that her bloodline had ruined his life before she had ever stepped into it. Still, he hadn't confronted her, hadn't pressed her with questions or commands. Instead, he had disappeared into his private wing, leaving her to pace the halls, restless and raw. By nightfall, the restlessness drove her outside. She found herself in the garden, where lanterns flickered softly against marble statues. The air was cool, the roses heavy with dew. She thought she was alone until she saw him. Damian stood at the edge of the fountain, cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers, the smoke curling into the night. He didn't turn when she approached, but she knew he'd sensed her. He always did. "I didn't think you smoked," Isabella said softly, though the words sounded fragile against the night. Damian exhaled, the smoke leaving him like a sigh. "I don't. Not anymore." His voice was lower than usual, carrying something she rarely heard, fatigue. "Only when the ghosts get too loud." She hesitated, then stepped closer. The moonlight carved shadows across his face, highlighting the sharpness of his jaw, the faint scar that cut across his cheekbone. He looked less like a monster and more like a man carved from grief and rage. "Whose ghosts?" she asked. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he crushed the cigarette against the stone edge of the fountain and turned to her. His eyes, dark, unyielding, held something softer, buried deep but flickering like an ember fighting to stay alive. "My brothers," he said at last. Isabella's breath caught. She had never heard him speak of family, not in the way that carried warmth. "You had a brother." "Had." Damian's jaw tightened. He looked past her, toward the garden's iron gates, as if seeing something she couldn't. "He was older. He should have been the heir, not me. He wanted peace, Isabella. Can you imagine? In this world, in this family, he wanted peace. He believed we could live without blood on our hands." His lips curled in a bitter half-smile. He didn't last long. Her chest tightened, dread swirling in her stomach. "What happened?" Damian's eyes flicked to hers, hard and unflinching. "Your father happened." The words sliced through the night like a blade. Isabella staggered, her throat closing. She should have turned away, should have let the distance grow between them, but she couldn't. His pain, raw and unguarded, held her captive. "My brother trusted him," Damian continued, his voice quieter now, frayed at the edges. "Antonio Rossi promised him an alliance. Promised him he'd stand against our rivals, that he believed in his vision of peace. And my brother believed him. He walked into that warehouse because your father told him it was safe. He walked into an ambush. And I..." Damian's hand curled into a fist. "I arrived too late." The silence that followed was unbearable. Isabella's heart ached with every word. Her father's betrayal wasn't just ink on paper or whispers of treachery. It had stolen something precious from Damian. And yet, here he was, standing before her, binding her to him instead of destroying her. "I hated you the moment I saw you," Damian confessed, his voice a rasp. "Not because of who you are. Because every time I looked at you, I saw him, lying in his own blood. I swore I'd never let myself forget. But then..." His gaze dropped to her lips, lingered there, then dragged back up to her eyes. "Then you ruined everything. You made me want again." Her throat tightened. She should recoil from him, should hate him for binding her into his darkness, for keeping the truth from her. But standing there, with the fire of his confession burning between them, she couldn't. And yet, here he was, standing before her, binding her to him instead of destroying her. "I hated you the moment I saw you," Damian confessed, his voice a rasp. "Not because of who you are. Because every time I looked at you, I saw him, lying in his own blood. I swore I'd never let myself forget. But then—" His gaze dropped to her lips, lingered there, then dragged back up to her eyes. "Then you ruined everything. You made me want again." Her throat tightened. She should recoil from him, should hate him for binding her into his darkness, for keeping the truth from her. But standing there, with the fire of his confession burning between them, she couldn't. For the first time, she saw the cracks in the devil's armor. Not the Don. Not the monster. Just a man who had lost too much. Her hand lifted before she could stop it, brushing lightly against his chest. His heart beat steady and strong beneath her touch, but his breath hitched. His hand rose, covering hers, holding it there against the rhythm of his life. "Damian," she whispered, not knowing what else to say. He closed his eyes briefly, as if her voice itself was both torment and salvation. When he opened them again, the vulnerability was gone, hidden beneath steel. But she had seen it. She would never forget it. "Go inside, Isabella," he said, his tone rough, commanding again. "Before I forget what little control I have left." She obeyed, but her heart stayed with him in the garden, tangled in the embers of a fire she no longer knew how to put out. Chapter 16. The betrayal within. The mansion was no longer safe. Isabella felt it in the air, in the way the guards whispered among themselves, in the way Damian's men kept their hands closer to their guns, their eyes flicking toward her as though she carried a secret she didn't know. 2 nights after Damian's confession in the garden, danger returned. This time, it wasn't a bomb or a threat delivered to his desk. It was something far more dangerous. Betrayal. She was walking through the east wing when she heard it. Damian's voice, low and furious, vibrating through the heavy oak doors of his war room. "You swore loyalty." His words cracked like a whip. "And yet my men lie dead because someone handed our enemy their route." The silence that followed was suffocating. Isabella's pulse raced as she pressed closer to the door. She knew she shouldn't listen, but her feet refused to move. Another voice, shaky and defensive, answered. I didn't." The sound of something crashing against the wall made her flinch. "You think I don't know a liar when I hear one?" Damian's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "Someone in this circle has betrayed me. Betrayed us. And I will find them." Isabella's breath hitched when the door suddenly swung open. A guard nearly collided with her. His face pale, eyes darting away as he stormed past. Damian stood in the doorway, his expression carved from stone. His eyes locked on hers, narrowing. "How much did you hear?" Her lips parted, but no words came. He stepped closer, his presence swallowing the hall. "Isabella." His voice was sharp enough to cut. "How much?" "Enough," she whispered. For a moment, the tension in his face faltered, replaced by something heavier. Weariness, perhaps. He dragged a hand through his hair, the gesture strangely human. "They know about you," he said finally. His voice carried no anger now, only cold certainty. "The Romano family knew where you'd be 2 nights ago because someone in this house told them. Someone close to me." The words chilled her to her core. She thought of the men who passed her in the halls, who bowed to her as Damian's wife, who swore loyalty in blood. Any one of them could have handed her life away. "Why would they want me?" she asked softly, though she already knew the answer. "Because you matter to me." Damian's eyes burned into hers. "Because they think if they have you, they have me." The confession unsettled her more than the threat itself. Later that evening, the entire household was summoned to the grand hall. Damian sat at the head of the long table, his men arrayed before him like soldiers awaiting judgment. Isabella sat at his side, though every nerve in her body screamed that she didn't belong there. He stood, his gaze sweeping over the room like a predator sizing its prey. One of you, he began, his voice low, dangerous, fed my enemies. You endangered my wife, my blood, my vow. His hand slammed down on the table, the sound reverberating through the hall. You thought you could slit my throat with whispers. You thought you could take what's mine. The silence that followed was suffocating. Isabella's heart pounded in her ears. She felt the weight of every stare, every suspicion that crackled like fire through the room. Damian's lieutenant Matteo rose. We'll find him, Don Moretti. Whoever it is, they won't live to see dawn. But Isabella caught something in his eyes as he said it. A flicker too quick, too sharp. She wondered if Damian saw it too. Her gaze darted to Damian, but his face was unreadable, a mask of calm fury. See that you do, Damian said simply. Then, almost as an afterthought, he reached for Isabella's hand beneath the table, his fingers curling around hers. His grip was tight, not gentle, but it steadied her shaking. As the meeting dissolved into hushed arguments and solemn vows, Isabella realized something terrifying. The danger wasn't only outside the gates. It was here, inside the devil's house. And one wrong move could turn every pair of eyes against her. Chapter 17. A Mother's Ghost. The mansion's hallways felt like a labyrinth of whispers. Isabella had grown used to shadows stalking her steps, but lately, it was memories that haunted her. Fragments of her mother's laughter, the scent of her perfume, the softness of her hands brushing back her hair. She had been a child when her mother died. Too young to understand, too sheltered to ask. The story had always been the same. A car accident. A tragedy, sudden and cruel. But something in Damian's eyes whenever her mother was mentioned, rarely accidentally, told her there was more. The truth found her in the library, hidden in plain sight. She had slipped inside while Damian was away meeting his lieutenants. The room smelled of old paper and smoke, the air heavy with secrets. She traced her fingers along the spines of books, pausing when one section felt off. A row of volumes didn't quite align with the rest. Curious, she tugged, and a hidden latch clicked. The panel swung open, revealing a narrow compartment stuffed with folders. Her pulse quickened. She knew she shouldn't. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous. But her hand reached anyway. The file she pulled free was marked simply. Elena Rossi. Her breath caught. Her mother's name. She opened it with trembling hands. Photographs slipped out. Crime scene images, police reports, witness statements. But it wasn't a car accident. It was an explosion. A fireball that had consumed a cafe in the city. Her mother had been inside. Isabella's eyes blurred as she scanned the words. Suspected target. Damian Moretti. Casualties. 6 dead, including Elena Rossi. Her knees gave out and she sank to the floor, the papers scattering around her. Her mother hadn't died by fate. She had died because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in the crossfire of Damian's bloody world. The door creaked. Isabella scrambled to gather the papers, but Damian's voice froze her in place. You weren't supposed to see that. He stepped into the room, shadows curling around him. For once, his mask of control wasn't perfect. His eyes were darker, heavier, filled with something between regret and defiance. Tell me it isn't true, she whispered, her voice breaking. Tell me my mother didn't die because of you. Damian's jaw clenched. It wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't the target. That doesn't matter. Isabella's voice cracked, her grief spilling out like a wound reopened. She's dead because of you, because of this empire, this war you live in. He took a step closer, his expression raw. If I could trade places with her, I would. You think I wanted this? You think I don't see her face every time I close my eyes? Her heart stuttered. The pain in his voice was real, but it only deepened her torment. My mother is gone, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. And you, every time I look at you, I see the fire that killed her. Silence fell between them, thick and unbearable. Then Damian crouched in front of her. his hand hovering inches from her cheek, though he didn't touch her. "You want to hate me," he murmured. "Maybe you should. But don't forget, Isabella, if your mother died because of me, then you're alive because of me. Every day I keep you breathing, I bleed for it." She flinched, shaking her head. "I don't want your protection. I want my mother back." His hand fell away, his eyes shuttering. For the first time, she saw him not as the devil who had stolen her freedom, but as the man who had stolen something from himself as well. Later, alone in her room, Isabella clutched her mother's photograph to her chest. Her tears stained the edges, but it wasn't only grief that consumed her. It was rage. Her life was no longer just bound by her father's sins. Her mother's blood was tangled in Damian's empire too. And somewhere deep inside, a dangerous thought began to take root. Maybe she wasn't just meant to survive the devil. Maybe she was meant to destroy him. Chapter 18: Chains of Desire. Isabella told herself she hated him. She repeated it like a prayer, a shield against the fire he lit inside her. But the words meant nothing when the night fell quiet and she could feel his presence like a storm pressing against her walls. The truth of her mother's death still burned in her chest, raw and unhealed. Damian's empire had swallowed her family whole, and part of her wanted to tear him apart with her bare hands. Yet when she opened her door that night and found him standing in the corridor, eyes shadowed, shirt undone at the collar, the ache in her chest shifted into something darker. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice low, trembling. "Because you can't sleep," Damian replied, his tone rough, as if the words were pulled from him against his will. His gaze dragged over her, hungry, unashamed. "And because neither can I." Her breath caught. She should have shut the door. She should have told him to leave her in peace. Instead, she stepped back, letting him in. The air thickened. His presence filled the room, devouring the fragile light of her lamp. He came closer, every step deliberate, until she felt the heat of him seeping into her skin. "Don't," she whispered, though her body leaned toward him. Damian's hand rose, brushing her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted everything he was. "Tell me you don't want this, Isabella, and I'll walk away." She opened her mouth to speak the lie, to push him back into the shadows where he belonged. But the words died on her tongue, because the truth was pulsing inside her, undeniable, merciless. She wanted him. Her silence was his permission. Damian's lips crashed against hers, not tender but consuming, a claim written in fire. She gasped against his mouth, caught between protest and surrender, but his hands anchored her, one at her waist, pulling her flush against him, the other cradling the back of her neck as though he couldn't bear to let her go. The kiss deepened, rough and desperate, years of hunger unleashed in a single breath. Isabella's knees weakened, her fingers clutching his shirt as though to steady herself, but it only dragged him closer. When his mouth left hers, trailing down the line of her throat, she shuddered. "This is wrong," she whispered, but her voice broke on the last word, betraying her. Damian's breath was hot against her skin. "Then damn us both." The words were a vow and a curse. His hand slid over her, unyielding but reverent, as if memorizing every curve. When his lips claimed hers again, she stopped fighting. The battle between hatred and desire collapsed, leaving only the fire that consumed them both. Clothes became barriers they tore away, each touch more frantic than the last. Damian's control, the iron mask he wore before the world, shattered in her hands. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the devil, raw and undone. When he finally took her, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate, overwhelming, a collision of pain and pleasure that left her gasping his name like a prayer she swore she'd never speak. His hands pinned her, claimed her, worshipped her, each movement a declaration that she was his and his alone. And though every part of her screamed she should hate him, Isabella's body betrayed her. She wanted more. Needed more. The fire between them was a chain, tightening with every kiss, every gasp, every shudder that tore through her. When it ended, they lay tangled in the sheets, sweat and shadows clinging to their skin. Damian's arm was heavy around her, possessive. his face buried in her hair as though he could breathe only if she was near. Isabella stared at the ceiling, her chest heaving, her thoughts a storm. She should have felt shame, regret, fury. Instead, all she felt was the terrifying truth. The chains that bound her to Damian weren't forged from fear or debt anymore. They were forged from desire. And she didn't know if she would ever break free. Chapter 19. The Enemy's Ultimatum. The morning after their collision of bodies and wills, Isabella woke to an emptiness beside her. The sheets were still warm, marked by Damian's presence, but he was gone. For a moment, she wondered if it had been a fever dream born from exhaustion and grief. Then she caught the scent of his cologne on her skin and knew it was real. The memory rushed back. His hands, his lips, his voice whispering damnation in the dark. A tremor ran through her, half shame, half longing. She pressed her palms to her face, hating the way her body ached for him even now. The door creaked open. A maid entered with trembling hands, her eyes flicking nervously toward Isabella. "Signora, you're summoned to the dining hall." Isabella frowned. Summoned? Like a prisoner to judgment. When she entered, the air was thick with tension. Damian sat at the head of the long table, his lieutenants flanking him like dark angels. Papers were spread before him, but his gaze was fixed on a single letter, one Isabella could see had been written in blood-red ink. He looked up when she entered. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second, only for her before the mask returned. "Sit," he commanded. She obeyed, her heart hammering. He slid the letter toward her. The words were bold, mocking. "Return the girl or watch your empire burn." Beneath it, a mark, an insignia she didn't recognize, but Damian's men did. Their muttered curses filled the room. "It's Varela," one of them growled. "He's calling you out." Damian's jaw tightened, his hand curling into a fist. "He dares." Isabella glanced between them. "What does this mean?" "It means," Damian said, his voice like steel dragged across stone, "that our enemies believe you are my weakness." His gaze pierced her, sharp and unyielding. "They think you are leverage." Her stomach twisted. "Pawn again. Always a pawn." "Then give me back," she snapped, her voice trembling. "If I'm the reason for war, then let me go. I never asked for this." The room went silent. Every eye turned to Damian, waiting for his judgment. He stood slowly, the chair scraping against the marble floor. In 2 strides he was beside her, his hand gripping her chin, forcing her to look at him. His eyes blazed, not with anger but with something fiercer, darker. "Never say that again," he hissed. "You are mine. Do you understand? And no one, no rival, no army, no god will take you from me." Her breath hitched. The room seemed to shrink, the weight of his possessiveness pressing against her chest. Part of her wanted to fight it, to scream that she wasn't a thing to be owned. But another part, the part that still remembered his arms around her, his lips claiming her, quivered with dangerous desire. "Damian," she whispered, but the word died on her tongue. He released her abruptly, turning back to his men. "Send word to Varela," he ordered coldly. "If he wants war, he'll have it. But Isabella stays." A murmur of assent rippled through the room. Plans were already being laid. Lines of defense, counterattacks, bloodshed. Isabella sat frozen, her pulse a drumbeat in her ears. The walls of Damian's empire had always felt like a prison. But now, with enemies circling and Damian's claim staked in blood, she realized something far worse. This wasn't just about survival anymore. She had become the center of a war. And in Damian's world, wars were only ever won in blood. Chapter 20. Shattered Vows. The storm had been building all day. Thunder rolled across the night sky, shaking the windows of the Moretti estate. Isabella sat in the library, a place she had learned to seek out when Damian's world felt too heavy. Shelves towered around her, filled with volumes of history and crime disguised as literature, their spines cracked by men long gone. She ran her fingers along the leather bindings, searching for distraction, but her eyes kept drifting back to the folder left carelessly on the desk. It bore her family's name, Rossi, in Damian's harsh, slanted handwriting. Her breath caught. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. But curiosity clawed at her, stronger than fear. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside were letters, bank statements, and old photographs. At first, they confirmed what she already knew. Her father's debts, his trips to casinos, the desperate loans taken from men he should have avoided. But then something else. A letter, older than the rest, written in her father's hand. She recognized the tilt of the script, the ink blotted in the corners where he had pressed too hard. "I've done as we agreed. The debt is his leash, and my daughter the chain. She will walk into his house, into his bed, and she will undo him from within. By the time Moretti realizes, it will be too late." Isabella's vision blurred. The paper trembled in her hands. She read the lines again and again, until the words carved themselves into her skull. Her father. Her own father had delivered her to Damian, not as a victim, not as a sacrifice, but as a weapon. The room tilted. She gripped the edge of the desk, bile rising in her throat. All those nights she had wept for her father, all the prayers whispered for his lost soul, it had all been a lie. He hadn't gambled them into ruin by chance. He had sold her future, her freedom, her very body to a Mafia war. The door creaked behind her. Damian's voice, low and edged, broke the silence. "You weren't meant to see that." She spun around, clutching the letter to her chest. Her eyes were wild, brimming with fury and betrayal. "So it's true. He planned this. He handed me over like bait." Damian stepped closer, his expression unreadable, though his eyes burned with a storm of their own. "Yes," he said finally. "Your father was not a man crushed by debt. He was a man who made a deal with my enemies. You were always meant to destroy me." The words cut deeper than the letter itself. Isabella staggered back, her chest heaving. "And you knew. You knew, and you still took me." He nodded once, his jaw tight. "I knew. And I took you anyway. Because I don't care what they planned. I don't care what he wanted. You are mine, Isabella. Not theirs. Not his." Her heart fractured. The vows spoken at their wedding echoed in her mind. Cold, ruthless, binding. She had thought they were forced upon her. Shackles forged from her father's mistakes. But now she saw the truth. Her vows had been shattered before they were even spoken. Her father had betrayed her. Damian had claimed her. And she was caught between them, torn apart by a destiny she had never chosen. "You should have let me go," she whispered, her voice breaking. Damian reached her in 2 strides, his hand gripping her wrist, dragging the letter from her grasp. His touch was searing, his eyes fierce. "Never. Even if the world burns, even if every enemy comes for me, I will not let you go." Tears slipped down her cheeks. Hatred and longing warred inside her chest, tearing her in two. She hated him for keeping the truth. She hated her father for condemning her. But more than anything, she hated herself, for the way her body leaned into Damian's touch, for the way her heart betrayed her with every frantic beat. "Damian," her voice cracked. "I don't know who to hate anymore." His hand slid to her jaw, forcing her to look up at him. His thumb brushed away a tear, almost tender. "Then don't waste your strength on hate. Save it for surviving what's coming." Lightning split the sky outside, bathing them in white light. For a heartbeat, Isabella saw him not as her captor or her protector, but as the man at the center of every vow broken, every truth shattered. And she knew, with a cold certainty, that nothing between them would ever be the same again. Chapter 21. Fractured Loyalties. The night was suffocating. Rain pounded against the mansion windows, tracing dark rivulets down the panes as if the storm itself mourned the chaos in Isabella's mind. She sat alone in her room, the letter from her father folded neatly on her lap, her fingers tracing the words over and over. She was always meant to destroy him. Her chest ached, not from grief this time, but from fury. Fury at the man who had raised her, who had handed her to a devil in human form, and yet also from an uneasy pull toward Damian, the man who had taken her, possessed her, and in strange, dangerous ways protected her. She could hear the distant echoes of the city outside, the faint rumble of gunfire as Varella's forces moved closer to the empire Damian had built with blood and ruthlessness. Every attack, every act of sabotage, reminded her that the world she had been thrust into was alive, and she was in its center whether she liked it or not. Isabella clenched her fists. She wanted to hate Damian. She told herself she did. And yet, she could not ignore the way his presence haunted her even when he was absent. The weight of his protection, the fire in his eyes, the intensity that had consumed them both in the darkness of the night before. She hated that she wanted him. But tonight desire was secondary. Strategy mattered. Survival mattered. Rising from her chair, she moved to the desk and began sifting through the papers Damian had left her. The intelligence on Varella's movements, the reports from street-level informants, the plans for upcoming retaliation. Every line of text was a map, a thread that could unravel or rebuild the empire around her. Her father had tried to use her as a pawn, but Isabella realized something frightening and exhilarating. She was no longer just a pawn. She could play. Her mind raced. Could she warn Damian about a possible ambush without revealing her father's betrayal? Could she manipulate the enemy's next move subtly, turning their aggression into an advantage? For the first time since arriving at the mansion, she felt the spark of power ignite in her veins, a dangerous thrill that left her pulse pounding. And then the door opened. Damian stepped inside, rain droplets clinging to the sharp line of his jaw. His coat slick against his shoulders. His gaze met hers immediately, dark and searching, as if he could read every flicker of thought behind her eyes. "You've been busy," he said, voice low and commanding, but with a hint of something softer, something that belonged only to her. "I had to," Isabella replied, holding his gaze. "Varela is moving faster than we thought. I've been reading the reports." A flicker of surprise crossed his features, quickly masked by a cold, calculating expression. "And what do you suggest?" She laid out her plan. Reposition loyal lieutenants to anticipate Varela's strike, cut off his supply lines, and feed misleading information back to his spies. Every word was precise, confident, measured. For a moment Damian said nothing. He studied her, and she could feel the weight of his scrutiny pressing down on her like a storm. Finally he spoke. "You've changed." Isabella's pulse quickened, her throat tightening. "I had to. He tried to use me. My father, he tried to use me. I won't let him or anyone control me again." A shadow of a smile ghosted across Damian's lips, almost imperceptible, but it sent a shiver down her spine. "I don't need you to obey me," he murmured. "I need you alive, thinking, fighting with me." Her chest swelled with a complex knot of emotions: anger, desire, fear, and a grudging respect. She hated that she needed him for survival. She hated that she felt drawn to him despite everything. And yet, she knew something undeniable. She wanted to be part of his world on her own terms. The storm outside intensified, lightning slicing the sky, illuminating the tension between them. Damian stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth, the magnetic pull of him drawing her in. Her hand brushed against the desk, steadying herself, but her heart betrayed her. "You're not just his weapon anymore," he said quietly, his voice rough with unspoken emotion. "You're mine. But more than that, you're yourself." Isabella met his gaze, the storm inside her echoing the tempest outside. She wanted to shout, to demand freedom, to curse the man who had ensnared her in his darkness. And yet, she found herself leaning just slightly toward him, acknowledging the truth that had taken her months to accept. She was no longer a victim. She was a player, a strategist, a force to be reckoned with. And Damian was not the only one shaping the game. The rain drummed a relentless rhythm against the windows, a reminder that the war was coming, and neither of them could afford weakness. But for the first time, Isabella felt a strange sense of control, a bitter and beautiful thrill. She would fight, she would survive, and she would decide on her own terms where her loyalty truly lay. Because no one, not her father, not Varela, not even Damian, would dictate her fate. Not anymore. Chapter 22. The war ignites. The night air was thick with smoke and tension. The city's heartbeat, the distant wail of sirens, the echo of gunfire, the low hum of engines, thrummed beneath Isabella's skin. She had never felt fear like this before, a fear that was both sharp and intoxicating. But tonight, fear was only part of the equation. Anger, determination, and a bitter thrill coursed through her veins. She stood at the edge of Damian's private estate, rain plastering her dark hair to her face, her coat clinging to her like armor. Through the shattered windows of a nearby building, flames licked the night sky, the work of Varela's first strike against the Moretti Empire. Smoke carried the scent of gunpowder and burning timber, and every report she had studied became real before her eyes. The enemy was precise, ruthless, and relentless. Isabella! Damian's voice, low and commanding, cut through the chaos. He was at her side, his coat open, the silhouette of his frame a promise of danger and power. Stay here. Her chest tightened. Stay here. She wanted to scream at him. Stay here while they destroy everything. I can help, she said, her voice steady despite the storm. I know their patterns. I can predict their moves. He studied her, eyes narrowing, and for a heartbeat she thought he would refuse. Then with a sharp nod he allowed it. Fine. But you follow my lead exactly. One mistake and... His gaze hardened, but there was trust there, begrudging and heavy. She swallowed her fear and nodded. The streets outside were chaos incarnate. Moretti's men clashed with Varela's forces in a deadly dance of gunfire, shouts, and explosions. Isabella moved with calculated precision, passing orders she had memorized from Damian's plans, directing loyal lieutenants to flank positions, set traps, and anticipate enemy maneuvers. She saw the enemy's vanguard approaching a warehouse, an ambush point that could have trapped Damian's men. She darted forward, signaling a counterstrike with hand gestures she had practiced. Bullets zipped past, ricocheting off concrete and steel, but she didn't falter. Every heartbeat reminded her. She was alive, she was present, and she was contributing. Damian appeared beside her suddenly, gun in hand. His expression a mix of fury and pride. You're reckless, he growled, but the faintest shadow of a smile touched his lips. And brilliant. Her pulse quickened, not from fear this time, but from the recognition in his eyes. She was more than a pawn. She was a strategist, fighter. Hours passed in a blur of smoke, shouts, and blood-stained rain. Isabella moved between positions, checking on guards, patching injuries, issuing orders. She saw the consequences of Varela's attack. Burned shops, wounded men, terrified civilians. But she also saw the strength in Damian's empire, the loyalty of men who would follow him into hell and back. And she felt a fierce pride. She was part of this, part of the fight. Then, the enemy made a bold move, attempting to corner Damian near the docks. Isabella acted instinctively, redirecting reinforcements to intercept, giving Damian the opening he needed to strike. In that moment she caught his eye, and the unspoken acknowledgement passed between them. She had saved him. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It wasn't a gamble of desire. It was pure survival, skill, and determination. Yet in Damian's gaze she saw something deeper, a recognition of her value, not just as his bride, but as a partner in the war. By dawn, the streets were eerily quiet. Smoke rose from rubble, and the acrid scent of gunpowder lingered in the air. Varela had been repelled. His forces battered but not destroyed. Isabella sank to a crate, soaked and exhausted, muscles trembling, but her mind was alight with adrenaline and satisfaction. Damian approached her, still clad in his soaked coat, eyes scanning her for injuries. You did well, he said simply. No flourishes, no theatrics, just truth. You've earned your place here. Not as a pawn, not as a hostage. As my equal in this fight. Her lips parted, but she didn't reply immediately. Words felt inadequate. Instead, she let herself feel the truth. She was no longer the girl trapped by debt or family betrayal. She was alive, she was dangerous, and she had proven it. Damian's hand brushed her arm briefly, a touch not of possession but of acknowledgement. And though her heart still beat a dangerous rhythm for him, she focused on the war. The battle was far from over. Varella's threat loomed larger than ever, and the city would soon feel the full weight of their vengeance. But for the first time, Isabella knew she could face it, not just as Damian's bride but as herself. The storm had passed, but the fire it ignited inside her was only beginning. Chapter 23. The Price of Trust. The morning air was sharp with frost, biting at Isabella's cheeks as she followed Damian through the quiet halls of the mansion. The war had not ended. Varella's forces were regrouping, and Damian's men were stretched thin, moving like ghosts through the city, repairing breaches, fortifying positions, and preparing for the next inevitable strike. "You'll come with me," Damian said, his voice low, almost a growl. "You need to see something, and I need to know I can trust you." Isabella's stomach tightened. She had learned to read the subtle shifts in his tone. This was no casual invitation, it was a test. One she could not refuse, and one she knew could cost her more than pride. He led her down a corridor into a dimly lit war room. Maps were spread across the table, marked with red and black ink, the names of streets, warehouses, and allies carefully logged. But it wasn't the room itself that caused her chest to tighten. It was the task Damian set before her. "This is Varella's supply chain," he said, tracing a finger across the map. "If you can infiltrate the warehouses tonight and misdirect their shipments, we'll gain a tactical advantage. But I need to be sure you won't betray me. That you won't slip into his hands." Her breath hitched. The moment was dangerous, yes, but it was also an opportunity. A chance to prove that she was more than the pawn her father had made her to be. More than just a bride. She could shape this war. "I can do it," she said, steadying her voice. "I can turn this to our advantage." He studied her, eyes narrowing. "Do you really mean that?" Isabella met his gaze squarely. "Yes, but on my terms. I won't be sent like prey. I need preparation. I need to move carefully. And I need to know the men I work with understand I'm part of the team, not a liability." For a heartbeat, Damian's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "You're learning quickly," he muttered. Then the steel returned. "Very well. But if I see hesitation or doubt, there will be consequences." She nodded. Consequences didn't frighten her. Not anymore. Night fell like a shroud. Isabella moved through the city under cover of darkness, the cold air cutting at her skin, but the thrill of purpose sharpening her senses. She had memorized the warehouse layouts, studied the guards' shifts, and predicted their patrol patterns. Every decision she made was deliberate, calculated. Her father's betrayal had taught her that survival depended on strategy, not hope. She reached the first warehouse and paused, observing the guards. 2 men at the gate, another pair pacing inside. She slipped silently through the shadows, her footsteps light, almost a whisper against the concrete. Inside, she redirected shipments, left false trails, and created the illusion of emptiness. Then a sudden noise, a guard turning too quickly, sent her heart racing. But she did not panic. Instead, she ducked into the shadows, waited, and used a shadowed corner to mislead him with subtle movements, leading him away from the real shipment. By the time she emerged from the warehouse, the city's skyline burned with faint lights from distant fires, a reminder that the war had not yet ended. And yet, she felt a surge of triumph. She had done it. She had acted decisively, proving her skill and her loyalty. When she returned to Damian, he was waiting in the rain-drenched courtyard, coat clinging to him, eyes dark and unreadable. "You were careful," he said, his voice clipped, measuring. I watched from a distance. You handled it well. Too well. Isabella met his gaze without flinching. I wasn't proving anything to you. I was proving to myself that I'm not a pawn. A brief flicker of admiration passed across his face, almost hidden behind his cold exterior. You've earned my trust, he said finally. Not because I need you to survive, but because I need you at my side. Her chest tightened, the words settling in her like coals. She had navigated danger, deception, and her own fear, and come out stronger. Damian's perception of her had shifted, yes, but more importantly, her perception of herself had solidified. She was capable, she was powerful, and she was no longer merely reactive to his world. She could influence it. Lightning split the sky behind him, illuminating the rain-soaked courtyard. In that flash, Isabella understood something fundamental. Trust, like power, must be earned through action, not words. And she was ready to continue earning hers, every single day if necessary. Because in Damian's world, hesitation could mean death. And Isabella Rossi had no intention of dying. Not now, not ever, and certainly not for Varela, or for her father, or for anyone who thought she could be a pawn again. Chapter 24. A cage of silk and steel. The mansion had never felt more like a fortress. Thick iron gates sealed the perimeter, guards patrolled every corridor, and security cameras tracked every movement. Damian's voice had been sharp when he spoke. You are not leaving. Not tonight. Not until the city is secure. Isabella had understood the meaning behind his words. She was being confined, isolated, protected, but to her it felt like a gilded cage. Silk curtains softened the room, velvet cushions lined the chairs, but the iron bars of reality pressed against her chest. At first frustration bubbled. She slammed a hand against the desk. She could have been out there, moving with precision, influencing the outcome of the war firsthand. Instead, she was here, confined to the mansion while Varela's forces prowled the streets beyond. But Isabella was not the type to succumb to mere circumstance. Her mind, sharpened by months of survival and betrayal, began to work. If she could not act in the field, she could act here. Strategize, influence, predict. She spread out the reports Damian's aides had brought her. Troop movements, supply lines, enemy sightings. Notes were scribbled in her sharp handwriting, corrections to positions, suggestions to fortify weak points. Every observation she made carried weight. She knew Damian would read them carefully. Hours passed. She listened from her room as the mansion buzzed below. Footsteps, quiet orders, the low murmur of men preparing for the next encounter. Each sound became data in her mind. Every choice she made in isolation became a calculated move in the game she had learned to play. And then he entered. Damian in his black coat, the storm outside glinting in the steel of his buttons, stood in the doorway. His presence alone made the walls of the room feel smaller, more confining, yet somehow intoxicating. You've been busy, he said, his tone carefully measured. I can hear it in the way the men move. Your suggestions. They've changed their patterns. They're faster, more coordinated. Isabella met his gaze, unflinching. I'm using the time you've given me wisely. You said safety comes first, but intelligence matters just as much. I've already anticipated 2 of Varela's potential moves for tonight. His expression darkened, a mixture of admiration and caution. You're becoming dangerous. Not in the way I expected. A flicker of a smirk touched her lips. I've never been simple to predict. Damian's eyes narrowed, scanning her with a precision that made her pulse quicken. Do you realize what you're doing? While confined, you're shaping the battlefield. You're not just surviving, you're influencing outcomes. Most would crumble in isolation. I don't crumble, she said softly, almost to herself. I adapt. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Damian stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, the sharp scent of his coat mingling with the faint metallic tang of the storm outside. You're not just my bride, he murmured, voice rough with emotion he rarely showed. You're more than I anticipated. I've underestimated you at times. Never again. Her heart thudded, caught between fear, respect, and a strange, dangerous longing. She hated that he could affect her this way. She hated that he could command such loyalty and fear simultaneously. And yet, she recognized the undeniable truth. She wanted to be part of this, part of him on her own terms. Hours turned into night, and Isabella continued her work. Each report she corrected, every strategy she proposed, subtly shifted the movements of Damian's men and the potential outcomes of the war. Though trapped, she realized that a cage was only a prison if one allowed it to be. She had turned hers into a command center. Finally, Damian lingered at the doorway one last time. His expression softened, though his eyes remained dark and unreadable. You're remarkable, he said quietly. Dangerous, brilliant, and stubborn. Don't let anyone take that from you. Isabella swallowed, nodding, letting the weight of his words settle like coals in her chest. She had proven herself not by fleeing or obeying blindly, but by thinking, observing, and influencing. And as the storm outside raged on, she realized something critical. Safety was not just a shield, it was an opportunity. And she would use every opportunity she had, no matter how confining, to shape the world she had been forced into. For the first time in months, she felt truly in control. Chapter 25. The Confession. The mansion was silent, save for the soft patter of rain against the windows. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. Isabella sat in the dimly lit study, a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. Damian entered quietly, his coat still damp from the evening rain, eyes dark and unreadable. I suppose it's time, he said, voice low, deliberate. Time for you to know everything. Her pulse quickened, a mixture of anticipation, dread, and something she refused to name. She had expected pieces of this story. Whispers, hints, fragments, but she had not anticipated the magnitude of what he would reveal. He began slowly, deliberately. The history of his empire unfolded before her like a blood-stained tapestry. Alliances built on fear and loyalty, betrayals that cost lives, the calculated ruthlessness that had allowed him to survive where others had fallen. Every revelation was another layer of darkness, another piece of the puzzle she had only glimpsed before. And then, the moment she had feared most, the truth about her mother. Damian's eyes softened briefly, though the steel beneath never wavered. Your mother, she knew the dangers. She tried to stop me. She tried to protect you, to protect your family. But in doing so, she became a casualty of the empire she never wanted to touch. His voice was almost a whisper. She died because of me, because of what this world demands. Isabella's breath caught. For a heartbeat, all the plans, the schemes, the strategies melted into raw grief. Her mother, gone, sacrificed to the violence and shadowed power Damian had wielded. And yet there was no room for tears. Not here, not now. The revelation burned inside her, a fire she could not extinguish. You think this changes everything, Damian continued, stepping closer, his eyes scanning her face for the reaction he had anticipated. But it doesn't. What matters is what you do with it. Her mind raced. Rage and sorrow collided with clarity. This was not a moment for despair. It was a moment for action. She could grieve, yes, but she could also strategize. She could turn this truth into leverage, into understanding, into power. I understand, she said quietly, her voice steady, though every fiber of her being trembled. I understand what you are, what you've built, and what it has cost. But knowing this, it doesn't weaken me, strengthens me, gives me perspective. I can use it. Damian studied her, eyes dark with curiosity and a touch of wariness. Use it how? Isabella rose, moving toward the map table. She traced potential moves, shifts in alliances, vulnerabilities in Varella's approach that only someone with her knowledge of both families could see. We can anticipate their next strikes. We can exploit the weaknesses they don't even know they have. Your empire isn't just built on fear, it's built on information. And now so am I. A tension hung between them, electric and unspoken. Damian, who had always held the upper hand, seemed to consider her words carefully. He nodded once, sharply, a silent acknowledgement of her intellect and growing influence. You are remarkable, he murmured. Not just for what you can do in the field but for how you think, how you adapt. You've grown into someone I cannot underestimate. And perhaps, someone I can trust. Isabella felt a shiver run through her. Trust was fragile, even in this world. But Damian's acknowledgement was something she could use, a subtle tool she had learned to value. She was no longer just his bride, his pawn, or his hostage. She was a strategist, a partner in the war that had shaped both of them. Yet beneath the surface, another fire simmered. The knowledge of her mother's death, the betrayal of her father, and the enormity of Damian's empire stirred in her a darker resolve. She would not simply react to events. She would anticipate them. She would shape them. And when the moment came, she would wield this understanding as a weapon. Quiet, precise, lethal. Damian stepped closer again, and this time the atmosphere was charged not with fear, but with unspoken recognition. You are dangerous, he said, a hint of a smile brushing his lips. And I like it. Isabella allowed herself a small, sharp smile. Dangerous, yes, but calculated. Every move she made from this moment forward would be intentional. Every word, every action, every decision would carry the weight of truth, strategy, and survival. The storm outside began to fade, but the storm inside her raged on. She had the knowledge. She had the power. And she had the will. For the first time, Isabella Rossi understood that knowing the truth didn't make her weaker. It made her unstoppable. Chapter 26. A blade between us. The night air was sharp, thick with the metallic scent of rain-soaked steel. Isabella stood at the edge of the courtyard, flanked by two of Damian's men. They had intercepted a message, an invitation disguised as a threat. Against Damian's instincts, she had insisted on going. And there he was, Varela. He emerged from the shadows like a viper uncoiling, his dark suit damp from the drizzle, his scarred face illuminated by the weak glow of a street lamp. Where Damian's presence commanded silence through sheer control, Varela's energy radiated unpredictability, like a storm that could strike without warning. His smile was wide, unsettling, as his eyes raked over Isabella with ownership he had no right to claim. You look just like your mother, he said smoothly, his voice carrying both venom and amusement. Strong, stubborn, wasted on Damian's leash. Isabella's spine stiffened, but she kept her face unreadable. You called me here. Say what you need to say. Varela took a slow step forward, ignoring the guns trained on him from Damian's guards. He wanted her attention, and he had it. I offer you something Damian never will, freedom, he said, his tone rich, coaxing. You think he protects you, but he cages you. You think he loves you, his smirk deepened. But he owns you. He can give you an escape. Walk away with me tonight, and Damian Moretti will fall. Your debt, your cage, your chains, all gone. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. His words were poison, but dangerous because they struck at a truth Isabella had wrestled with for months. Damian had caged her, bound her to rules, thrown her into a world she never chose. And yet, she inhaled, slow and steady, and looked Varela directly in the eye. You mistake me for someone who needs saving. His smirk faltered. I don't want your freedom, she continued, her voice strong, each word slicing through the damp air. Not when it comes from you. You're not offering me a way out. You're offering me another kind of prison. Damian may be ruthless, but at least I know where I stand with him. With you. I'd be nothing but a trophy, a weapon against him. Varela's eyes gleamed, his temper flashing beneath the surface. He took another step closer, lowering his voice to a hiss. You think Damian will ever truly let you go? You think he'll ever see you as more than a pawn in his empire? He killed your mother by dragging her into his world. Do you want to be next? The mention of her mother was a blade to the chest, but Isabella didn't flinch. She stepped closer too, closing the distance between them until the guards tensed, ready to intervene. Her gaze was sharp, unyielding. My mother died fighting for something. If I die, it will not be as your possession. I choose my place in this war. And I choose it on my own terms. For the first time, Varella's mask cracked. A flicker of frustration, anger even, crossed his face. He had expected fear, desperation, submission. Instead, he was confronted with a woman who had learned to wield her captivity as power. You'll regret this, he growled, voice low and dangerous. When Damian burns, you'll burn with him. Isabella leaned in just enough that only he could hear her final words. Then at least I'll burn by my choice, not yours. Her defiance was a spark in the dark, and she saw it, Varella's fury, barely leashed. He wanted to strike her, to break her resolve. But with Damian's guards watching and her eyes locked unflinchingly on his, he did nothing. He simply stepped back into the shadows, his voice echoing as he vanished. This isn't over, Isabella Rossi. You've chosen your side, and that choice will destroy you. The courtyard fell silent again. Isabella exhaled slowly, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She turned to the guards, her voice calm, commanding. Take me back. Damian needs to know what was offered, and why I refused. As they escorted her away, Isabella realized something profound. Tonight wasn't about loyalty to Damian. It was about loyalty to herself. By refusing Varella, she hadn't just chosen Damian. She had chosen her own agency, her own path, her own strength. The blade between them had cut deep, but she had decided which side of it she would stand on. Chapter 27. Inferno. The city burned. Smoke clawed its way into the night sky, flames devouring the edges of Damian's territory as if the streets themselves had turned against him. Gunfire cracked in the distance, sharp bursts echoing like thunder. The war Varella had promised had come, and it came with fire. From the moment the alarms rang through the mansion, Isabella knew she couldn't remain a spectator. She tore through the corridors, ignoring the protests of guards, until she found Damian rallying his men in the main hall. His coat was half-buttoned, his jaw clenched with fury, his voice commanding order amidst the chaos. Fall back to the eastern quarter. He broke off as his eyes caught Isabella. You stay here. No, she grabbed a rifle from a nearby crate, her hand steady despite the tremor in her chest. You need every pair of eyes tonight. I can fight, and you know it. For a moment, his expression hardened, torn between rage and reluctant respect. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. Stay at my side. The streets were war. Fires painted everything in shades of orange and crimson, ash drifting like snowfall. Isabella moved with Damian and his men, the heat searing her lungs, the noise deafening. It was chaos, but chaos had become her teacher. They reached the eastern block, where Varella's men had broken through. The clash was brutal, steel against steel, gunfire slicing the night, screams swallowed by the roar of fire. Isabella's pulse raced, but her focus sharpened. She shouted warnings, spotted ambushes before they could spring, directed Damian's men to higher ground. At one point, a young soldier stumbled, his arm bleeding heavily. Without thinking, Isabella dragged him behind cover, tore fabric from her dress, and bound the wound with swift precision. The boy's wide, terrified eyes locked on hers. You're going to live, she told him firmly, her voice steel. Now get back up and fight. He did. Her hands shook for only a moment before she forced herself forward again. There was no time for fear. The battle pressed closer, flames licking at the edges of nearby buildings. Smoke stung her eyes as she reloaded the rifle, the weapon heavy but grounding. She fired at shadows advancing on Damian's flank, her shots precise enough to make his men glance at her with newfound respect. Through the inferno, she found herself shoulder to shoulder with Damian. His movements were calculated, his commands sharp, but his eyes flicked to her more than once, half furious, half admiring. "You should be dead by now," he growled between shots. "Not today," she shot back, her lips curling into something dangerously close to a smile. An explosion rocked the street, scattering debris across the cobblestones. Damian shoved her down, shielding her with his body as fire and glass rained from above. For a heartbeat, she felt the raw weight of him, the heat of the world collapsing around them. And then she pushed him off, grabbing his arm and dragging him to his feet. "Don't protect me," she snapped, her voice burning as fierce as the flames. "Fight with me." For the first time, Damian didn't argue. He simply nodded and raised his weapon. The night stretched into a blur of fire, steel, and survival. Isabella moved like she had been born for this world, not because she wanted it, but because she had been forged in its flames. She saved men from certain death, cut off ambushes before they struck, and stood unflinching where others faltered. By the time the fighting subsided, the eastern quarter was scarred but still standing. Damian's men dragged bodies, tended wounds, and doused the flames. The air reeked of blood and smoke, but there was also something else, respect. Eyes that once saw Isabella as a pawn now looked at her as one of them. Damian stood at the center, his coat torn, his cheeks smeared with soot and blood. He turned to her, his expression unreadable, his eyes burning with something more than the reflection of fire. "You changed the tide tonight," he said simply. She wiped the ash from her face, her chest heaving. "I did what needed to be done." His gaze lingered, intense, almost reverent. "You're not my weakness," he said, his voice low, rough. "You're my strength." For a moment, amidst the wreckage, Isabella let the words settle. She had entered this world as a victim, a pawn, a debt repaid with flesh. But tonight she had fought, chosen, survived. She wasn't just in Damian's world anymore. She was shaping it. And as the flames smoldered in the distance, Isabella Rossi knew the inferno hadn't destroyed her. It had baptized her. Chapter 28, The Devil's Fall. The mansion had always felt unshakable, its walls heavy with power, its halls echoing with Damian's authority. But tonight silence reigned. A silence that reeked not of peace, but of betrayal. Isabella knew it the moment the alarms cut off mid-blare, the moment the guards who should have filled the corridors were nowhere to be found. She ran through the hall, her breath sharp, her instincts screaming. Something was wrong, fatally wrong. She reached the grand study, the place where Damian held his councils, but it was too late. The room was overturned, chairs shattered, papers scattered. The window stood open, curtains flapping in the wind. Blood smeared the edge of the desk. "Damian!" The name left her lips as a whisper, torn between rage and dread. She clutched the desk for balance, her pulse hammering in her ears. He was gone. Within the hour, the truth spread like wildfire. Varela had struck from within. A trusted lieutenant, one of Damian's own, had turned, opening the gates, disabling the alarms, leading the enemy straight to him. Damian Moretti, the devil of the underworld, had been captured. The empire trembled. Men whispered in corridors, some ready to flee, others preparing for a war they weren't sure they could win without him. But Isabella did not tremble. In the quiet of her chambers, she stood before the mirror, staring at her reflection. The girl who had been forced into this life months ago was gone. The woman who stared back at her now carried ash in her hair from the battles she had fought, scars on her hands from choices made. She had been forged in the fire, and now the fire demanded more. She had two paths. She could secure her own survival, take what she knew, disappear, and let Damian fall. She would be free at last, free from debts, from chains, from the man who had appended her life. Or she could risk everything, step into the lion's den, gamble her life and soul to bring him back. The very man who had caged her, who had broken and remade her, who had confessed truths that burned her heart raw. Freedom or loyalty? Survival or sacrifice? She closed her eyes and breathed deep. The answer wasn't as simple as love or hate. It was about choice. For too long, others had chosen her fate. Her father, Damian, even the empire itself. But now, standing at the edge of a world about to collapse, Isabella understood the truth. She wasn't saving Damian because she had to. She wasn't saving him because she feared life without him. She would save him because it was her decision. Her terms. Her power. Her fists clenched. Her voice, soft at first, grew firm. No one decides for me. Not anymore. When she emerged from her chamber, the men in the hall turned to her, their faces drawn with uncertainty. Isabella's eyes burned with resolve as she addressed them. Damian is captured. Varela thinks this empire dies with him. He's wrong. She lifted her chin, her voice steady, commanding. You will fight with me. We will bring him back. And when we do, the devil will rise. Not because of fate, but because I chose it. The room stirred. Some looked at her with doubt, others with awe. But none could deny the steel in her tone, the fire in her gaze. For the first time, Isabella Rossi wasn't a bride, a pawn, or a captive. She was a leader. Later, when the maps were spread across the table and strategies whispered in hushed tones, Isabella leaned over them with razor-sharp focus. Every move was calculated, every plan refined. She knew the risks, knew the blood that would be spilled. But she also knew this. She wasn't walking into Varela's trap as a victim. She was marching in as a woman who had chosen her place in the war. And in that choice, Isabella felt the weight of transformation. This wasn't just about Damian anymore. This was about her. The devil had fallen. But Isabella Rossi had risen. Chapter 29. Bride of the Devil. The night air tasted of ash and gunpowder. Flames licked the skyline in the distance where Varela's men clashed with what was left of Damian's loyal forces. The empire, once unshakable, now stood on the razor's edge of ruin. At the heart of the chaos, Isabella stood before Damian's generals. Men older than her, hardened by decades of bloodshed, now looked to her, not because she carried Damian's name, but because she had proven herself. She had stood with them in battle. She had bled with them. She had chosen to fight when others whispered of retreat. The maps were spread across the oak table, scarred with spilled whiskey and the weight of desperate hands. Varela's stronghold was marked in red. Damian's prison confirmed by spies willing to die for their word. The men murmured of risks too great, of losses too heavy. Isabella silenced them with a single, cutting gesture. My father's betrayal placed me in Damian's hands, she began, her voice steady as steel. He wanted to use me to destroy this empire. He thought I would be a pawn. He was wrong. She leaned forward, eyes blazing. I am not my father's daughter. I am not here to destroy Damian. I am here to rule beside him. A stunned hush filled the room. For the first time, Isabella did not feel like she was borrowing Damian's power. It pulsed through her in her own right, born of choice, courage, and a heart hardened by survival. She traced the map with her fingertip. We hit Varela where he is weakest. His reliance on fear. We don't fight him like an army. We fight him like a ghost. We break his supply lines. We burn his safe houses. We bleed him from the shadows until he is forced to expose himself. She looked up, locking eyes with every man present. And when he does, we take Damian back. No hesitation. No doubt. Only fire. When the men finally nodded, some reluctantly, others with grim respect, Isabella felt the weight of command settle over her shoulders. She wasn't Damian's stand-in. She wasn't a fragile bride hiding behind his shadow. She was the one leading the devil's army into war. The operation unfolded with ruthless precision. Safe houses exploded in the night. Varela's shipments went up in flames. His men found themselves stalked and gutted in alleys by shadows they could not name. Fear spread faster than gunfire, and Isabella was at the center of it all, orchestrating chaos with elegance and fury. But it wasn't just strategy. Isabella was on the ground, in the smoke and blood. She disguised herself to slip past guards, whispered lies into enemy ears, and turned Varella's paranoia against him. Every step she took, every risk she bore, carved away the girl who once longed only for escape. By the time the gates of Varella's compound loomed before her, Isabella was no longer the caged bride. She was the one carrying the torch into the lion's den. They found Damian in chains. His body bore the marks of torture, bloodied knuckles, bruises, lashes across his back, but his spirit remained unbroken. When Isabella entered the cell, torchlight spilling over her face, Damian's lips curved in the faintest, disbelieving smile. "You." His voice was rough, fractured but steady. "You came." "I didn't come to rescue you," Isabella answered, kneeling beside him. Her fingers worked quickly at the chains. "I came because this is my war too. You don't own me, Damian. Not anymore." His eyes, dark and burning even through the haze of pain, searched hers. And then, despite his condition, he laughed. Low, raw sound. "My bride," he murmured, not as possession but as recognition. The chains fell. As she helped him to his feet, the sounds of battle raged outside. Her plan unfolding, her choices tearing Varella's empire apart brick by brick. Together they stepped out of the darkness, side by side, no longer captor and captive, but partners forged in fire. By dawn, Varella's compound was nothing but smoke. The enemy fled like rats, their leader vanishing into the shadows. Damian stood among his men, battered but alive. And beside him stood Isabella, no longer hidden behind silk gowns or gilded cages. She had chosen her place. Not as pawn, not as victim, not as daughter of a betrayer, but as bride of the devil, equal, formidable, undeniable. And for the first time, Damian's empire truly feared her. Chapter 30, Until Death. The dawn broke red. Not the gentle blush of morning, but the burning scar of war. The city lay in ruins, streets littered with broken glass, abandoned cars, and the bodies of those who had gambled their lives in the clash between titans. In the heart of the battlefield, Damian and Isabella stood shoulder to shoulder, their silhouettes outlined against smoke and fire. His body bore the wounds of captivity, her face the grime of battle, but neither wavered. They were no longer Mafia Dawn and unwilling bride. They were warriors bound by blood, desire, and a fate they had chosen together. Varella's forces closed in, their chants echoing through the ruins. And then Varella himself emerged, dressed in black, eyes wild with triumph. "You should have stayed broken, Moretti," he snarled. His gaze slid to Isabella. "And you, little bride, you could have had freedom. Instead, you chained yourself to the devil." Isabella stepped forward, voice carrying over the battlefield. "I didn't chain myself to him." Her tone was ice and fire combined. "I chose him. And that is what will destroy you." The men around her stirred, emboldened not by Damian's presence, but by hers. For a fleeting moment, Isabella saw Varella's mask slip, fear glinting in his eyes. The final clash erupted like thunder. Gunfire roared, blades flashed, men screamed. Damian fought like a beast unleashed, every strike fueled by rage and survival. Isabella, no longer sheltered, wielded her weapon with precision, each shot fired with purpose, each move a defiance of the girl she once was. They fought as one, backs covering each other, movements instinctively in sync. He shielded her from a blade that would have ended her. She pulled the trigger on an enemy that would have ended him. Together they carved a path through chaos, two figures burning brighter than the fire around them. At last, Varella confronted them. Damian, blood dripping from his jaw, lunged. The two men collided in a brutal clash of fists and steel, the weight of years of rivalry crashing down in every blow. But this wasn't Damian's fight alone anymore. Isabella moved like a shadow, circling, calculating. When Varella pinned Damian to the ground, blade pressing to his throat, Isabella's voice cut through the madness. "Look at me, Varella." He turned just enough. Her bullet found its mark. Varella staggered, fury frozen on his lips, before crumpling into the dirt. His empire fell with him, the echoes of his reign swallowed by silence. The battlefield stilled. The survivors looked on as Isabella lowered her gun, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from the enormity of what she had done. Damian rose beside her, bloodied and bruised, but alive. His hand found hers, their fingers interlacing in the midst of carnage. For a moment there was no sound, just the pounding of their hearts, beating as one. "You've damned yourself, Isabella," Damian whispered, his dark eyes searching hers. "Maybe," she answered, steady, unflinching. "But I chose this damnation. I chose you." His lips curved in the faintest of smiles. A devil's smile. And then he kissed her, there in the ruins, while the world burned around them. The war was over, but peace would never be theirs. They were bound together, not by innocence or forgiveness, but by obsession, betrayal, and love sharp enough to wound. Isabella knew the truth in her bones. She was no longer just the girl forced into marriage, nor the pawn of her father's sins. She was the bride of the devil, and now his equal. And if the world called them monsters, then so be it. They would rule as monsters. Until death.